Museums. My name is Marika Hedin. I was a museum director in the maritime world for a number of years, but about 5 years ago I moved on to a foundation. So I am now in the very pleasant position of helping to fund museums. And we as a funder always, of course, we're looking for new and relevant ways of changing museums. So the first speaker in our session out of two is Bert Boer. And you have a really interesting background, Bert, in business and the museum sector, which makes you extremely well suited to be the Director General of the Maritime Museum in Amsterdam. And you will talk about new ways of working in the museum and the future plans. So please.
So thank you, Marika. Dear participants of the ICMM Congress. On the screen, you can see John Masefield's novel, The Birds of Dawning. A bit out of proportion, because it had to fit the sheet, but I'm sure some of you have read this book. It's a story about a group of 16 seamen who got shipwrecked during a China tea race with the clipper Black Gauntlet. They have to survive the ocean in an open boat. Almost no food, no water, storms, rain, big waves, and even a big shark. And at some moment, they see a ship passing by in the distance. Unfortunately, they are not noticed, and the ship sails by. And then the old mate, old James Fairford, speaks to the captain. I wish to God we had a rocket, sir. A rocket would catch their eye. Men in ships are always looking up, and men ashore are usually looking down. And this famous quote you can buy now on posters and mugs on the internet. Men in ships are always looking up, and men ashore are usually looking down. So look up, participants of the ICMM Congress. Look up, men, women, and all genders. Look up, look ahead, and use this Congress to think of the future of the maritime museums. Always struggling with technique, I'm sorry. But the next sheet is Word, and I think you will recognize it. So I know the right direction now. I think you recognize this sheet. You've seen this image. The blue marble, and more than 70% of the surface of our planet is water. And with global warming, this percentage will even increase. And what is also increasing is the world population. And with more people living on this planet, we will need to look carefully to what the oceans can offer and how mankind can make sensible use of the oceans. And in my opinion, this is exactly where maritime museums are all about. A modern maritime museum should not only deal with historic ships and shipping. The main message should be about the oceans. Healthy oceans for a healthy world. And not only about transferring goods and people from A to B, but maybe also for other things. Energy from the sea, food from the sea, and not only fishing like hunting, but also more as a responsible sea farming, recreation on sea and living on sea. And the role of the ocean as an engine to mankind, nature and climate, as our keynote speaker Helen Shevsky stated this morning. A healthy ocean is essential for our future. And in that aspect, the new United Nations treaty that 30% of the free oceans should be protected in 2030 can be considered as a giant step in the right direction. In this presentation, I will give a brief introduction about the Maritime Museum Rotterdam, and I will give a few examples of how we try to move from a shipping museum to a modern maritime museum. If you looked up during the welcome drinks in the Harbour Pavilion yesterday, you may have noticed the big screen with images of shipbuilding, and images not only about the past, but also about today. And if you look up in our gangway, that's our gangway, and at the end, you will see the ship of the future, designed by school children together with the Maritime Research Institute Marin. And between the first deck and the second deck of our museum, there you can see the solar boat built by the University of Delft, supported by a broad range of sponsors from the maritime industry. We want to show today, make visitors think about tomorrow, and we need partners to do so. As you can see on this map, with worldwide transportation patterns, Rotterdam is the biggest harbor in Europe. The Rotterdam area is a center for maritime industry, and therefore it's no coincidence that Rotterdam has, for 150 years now, a maritime museum located in its city center with the city government as the biggest and most important partner. We work with maritime companies, universities, research institutions and artists in our presentations because they help us on the innovation part or the future part. Of course, being a museum, we take care of unique objects. The collection includes over 1 million objects, and the museum wants to make this collection accessible to as many people as possible, for research, to gain new insights, or simply to enjoy, on site and online. We use objects in our presentations, and at this moment around 800 objects are on display in the museum. And 41 ships, cranes, and our recently restored grain elevator and even a lighthouse outside in the museum harbor. This ship model on the slide is an older one, the so-called Moderator model. Originates from Spain and is considered to be one of the oldest wooden ship models in the Western world. This model you can find on the second deck of this museum is one of the masterpieces of our collection. And on that deck you also can find our harbor exposition, built like an open museum depot, and our migration exposition, Anchored, where we invited 10 young Rotterdammers to tell us about the migration background of themselves and their families. In our museum harbor, the outdoor collection can be seen. Many of the ships and cranes are still operational, and the ships are being used for short journeys and passages through the harbor, as you enjoyed yesterday. Maintenance and sometimes restorations of an outdoor collection is costly. Recently, we conducted a €2.4 million restoration project in close cooperation with the Museum in Antwerp. We restored the grain elevator number 19, built in 1926 and almost 100 years old now. And the main reason to spend this large amount of money on a 600-ton steel floating vacuum cleaner was that it is a unique symbol of maritime innovation. Before elevators were employed, it took about a week and more than 100 laborers to unload a sea ship with grain. And with the new elevators, only 7 workers and 2 days were needed, and it made the harbor grow and ships could leave earlier. The elevator has as well Rotterdam as Antwerp on her bows. The object pendles between the two museums, and it just returned 3 weeks ago after a long and crowded summer stay in Antwerp. The museum harbor is also room for attractive guest ships. And if there are innovations to be present, like this river clean-up vessel from the Ocean Cleanup Organization, we make effort to have them in our museum harbor. And at this moment, this vessel is operational in South America. Before I go to the example, I want to give some facts and figures. The museum has around 200,000 visitors a year. 9% is education, 17% is international visitors. We have about 68 staff members paid. We have about 200 volunteers and a budget of around 10 million euros a year, of which 60% is funded by the city of Rotterdam. And we have, of course, the museum harbor and the maintenance workshops outside. A visit to our museum is for most visitors a nice day with the family. So it's important to have good catering facilities, a friendly staff, and a nice view on the museum harbor to celebrate. And to celebrate our 150 years anniversary, the apple pie costs only 150 cents this year. Our approach of the museum is to show the often invisible maritime world. Addressing a broad public, we tell stories of the past, the present, and the future of the maritime sector and the impact on society at large. For some people, the coast is where the land ends. For others, it's where the world begins. This is a statement by former submarine commander and Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mr. Piet de Jong. And it shows how we see the maritime world. Unknown for many, and for others a world full of opportunities, as long as you dare to look behind its horizon. And ships are needed to get there. For example, in our offshore energy exposition, you can learn about the pioneering Spirit, the biggest ship in the world for decommissioning oil and gas platforms. In this exhibition, you can visit an offshore platform and learn about installing wind and energy at sea. Then take the elevator to the deep sea before going to the part where we present the ideas for the future and ideas which we change every year. This exhibition is very good. It got an 8.4 appreciation from our visitors, and the most important is that it gave the museum a structural growth in visitors about 35%. And for visitors, and especially for school children, not only watching is good enough, they want to touch things, they want to do things, they want to build things, and they want to learn things. So in our educational programs, we let children build their own offshore energy structures, and we make them think about how and work in the future. Another example is our children exhibition, Professor Splash. We're rebuilding a new one at the moment, and it's about the deep sea. So no longer only about transport, but about the deep sea. And this is a success of the museum. We do this for 30 years. This is our fifth edition, and it will open in the end of October. Then on deck 1, we present Destination Port City. Visitors can take a ride on an imaginary subway line, setting off near the location of the medieval dam in the river Rotte to the center of the city, and then travel to the outskirts of the harbor. During the metro ride, they will find how the port of Rotterdam grew and how citizens from different social and cultural backgrounds have contributed to this evolution. The exhibition is a journey to time, showing that the city and port have a mutual influence on each other and are linked. And as an offspin of this exhibition, we also branded the real metro station Leuvenhaven. You can find it behind the working pavilion, and if you go to this metro station, you will find 100-meter long, 4-meter high photos of our ship's model, where we can show the evaluation of shipbuilding between 1700 and today. I'd like to finish the presentation with an example of the cooperation between the Rotterdam Harbour Organization. Yesterday, the badges were distributed in the Port Pavilion, part of our Leuven Pavilion. It is the place where a broad public and the visitors of the museum can get more information how you can discover the Rotterdam Harbour. Starting from the historic Leuven Haven, where the museum is located, to the man-made second Maasvlakte, about 42 kilometers further west. Discover bike routes, walking routes, boat tours, nature, harbors, places to eat, and even the Maasvlakte beach. Discover the maritime world and Rotterdam Harbour, where land and water meets. Look up and discover. Look up and learn. Look up and think. We are ocean. Enjoy the Congress and thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Bert, and I think that was an excellent way of saying really meaningful things in exactly 15 minutes. And I want to apologize for my faux pas saying that you were director of the museum in Amsterdam. What a faux pas, meant Rotterdam. Our next speaker, Tove Austbø, has a long history of being a historian and curator at the Stavanger Maritime Museum. And in your own research, you've looked into port history, cultural history, and the history of collections. And now you're going to tell us about the exciting projects of developing a museum, a local museum in new directions. So the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Good, now we're ready. So, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share and discuss our plans and visions at Stavanger Maritime Museum. Our response to the UN's initiative to increase the world's ocean literacy is to address some of the fundamental connections between man and sea as seen from our place at the southwest coast of Norway. And here we are, a medieval North Sea city that is gearing up to celebrate its 900th centennial next year. We have thrived and prospered along the main northern shipping lane for millennia. Formed by the coastal landscape, the harbour have always catered for us, and we have relied on the prosperity brought to us by the resources in the sea. Our region is steeped in natural beauty and well provided by the fisheries, merchant shipping, shipbuilding, oil and gas production, offshore industries, and now also maritime mass tourism. Everything gives us innovation and confidence in our ability to tackle any future challenge. In many ways, we share identity with people of Rotterdam. We celebrate can-do spirit and are technology optimists. We saw a salient expression of this confidence only 3 weeks ago as we celebrated the conclusion of the 50th Offshore Northern Seas venue right outside the museum doorstep. We used to call this biennial meeting of offshore producers the oil exhibition, but now they are all energy providers, competing in presenting the latest in green technologies. Language is part of their survival strategy. And while the grand celebrations and fireworks fill the sky over the harbor and over our museum, the Swedish activist Greta Thunberg and Extinction Rebellion tried to ruin this party by demonstrating outside the local processing plant for oil and gas, delaying supplies from Norway to Europe. So this is our daily life. Our maritime heritage is woven into the lands, into the cityscape, and it affects so many aspects of our lives, also our museum. So as a museum, we are part of an ever-changing historic harborscape, and we evolve with our surroundings. The history is reflected in the location and the very structure of our buildings. They are in themselves port history, and the authenticity is our greatest asset. Built by affordable and readily available material from local forests to satisfy basic and immediate needs, transported by sea and built after vernacular traditions, they represent true sustainable values. And as the city now built a memorial park for war sailors outside, and the terrace gardens from the 17th century again will become urban green spaces used for leisure and for food, we also incorporate these narratives in our exhibitions. Representing a relatively small museum, but with a 98-year-long history of research, collecting, and outreach, I expect that many of you share the keystones in our mission. We were initiated to celebrate entrepreneurship, technological innovation, and trade at sea, mainly within the context of the nation or even the region. So we have our fair share of beautiful representations of ships, instruments for navigating the sea, tools and drawings from shipbuilding, photos of seafarers' life, objects and paraphernalia which have been collected or donated to us for almost a century. But new issues are knocking at our door. Sustainability and care for the marine environment are new challenges. So how do we go onwards? There is a lot at stake. Our focus has mainly been to gaze above water towards the horizon. But now we are not only looking up, but we are also looking down to what is going underneath the surface. And all is not well. we certainly have eye-openers close to us. The beautiful, idyllic painting from the 19th century, this area is now shaken by reality. Global shipping has transported the dreaded sea vomit or carpet sea squirt to Stavanger from Asian waters, and relatively quickly strangling marine life. It is not an easy task to fight back. And we talk about this in our museum, in our education, and in media to raise awareness. But we also experience from our audience that fear and distress has never been the best advocate for change. We want to explore, understand, and provide historical context for our visitors and ourselves, and to encourage everyone to take part in the change. So our approach is to cultivate and nurture the fascination and love for the ocean and maritime heritage, from ancient time to the present day. And we do this in multiple ways. One is to present historic context and to read established stories in new ways and with green glasses on, so to speak. This quotation is one of the most famous or well-known descriptions of the sea in Norwegian literature, written by an author from Stavanger and cited again and again as poetry. Alexander Kielland said that nothing is as boundless as the sea, nothing so patient. In its vast, cool depths, it has room for all mortal woes. It is also the last sound one in an ailing world. But this quotation also presents us an explanation for how we could allow ourselves to end up with today's situation. The ocean has been perceived as boundless, endless. It could endure everything, which also means that we could place our rubbish there, hide it, out of sight, out of mind. That is why we are now transcending the culture-nature division in our narratives. In our history lab, we test and experiment with new ways to present the history at sea. We displace objects there, disrupt the narratives that our visitors expect. We include non-human perspectives and the ocean and marine life as actors independent of humans. And we inquire about past and present use of the oceans and of overuse of marine resources. For this, we need partners. We cannot do this alone. Our colleagues at the Natural History Museum are our best allies. We also invite students from the University of Stavanger and otherwise to critically read our exhibitions. One very sobering and useful experience was to give invite for a museum hack in our latest exhibition. We really had some new perspective on the way that we present our objects and the context that we present them in. And we also work with Arctic explorers to convey life in the oceans on film and on new digital platforms, live streaming as they dive into the seas in Greenland, Svalbard, and the far north. And we go down to object level. We share and diversify our stories. And I'll give you two example of how we do this. When we look at our collections with new perspectives, some of the less spectacular objects have become interesting conversation pieces. In the back of this photo of sailors' souvenirs, you see two corals that have been mounted and presented as exotic keepsakes to be brought back home as souvenirs by sailors. But how do we see them today? Are they marine object? Are they natural history? Are they a maritime animal port memorial? Are they examples of threatened species? Or are they infrastructure for non-human life? Or, as one student so poetically expressed it, they provide shelter for marine life, just as Stavanger Harbour always has sheltered its fleet and its population from the oceans. Our tide predicting machine, the special purpose mechanical analog computer that was constructed and set up to predict the ebb and flow of sea tides, how do we understand it today? Is it a machine? A mathematical device, a regulator of coastal traffic, or guiding daily life in coastal communities? Is it a health and security measure, or tool for imperial powers to control their empire? This is how we work to diversify our stories. We join up with other colleagues. This is in Malta. We look at how we explore underwater cultural heritage and how we manage it. How can we understand shipwrecks and submerged landscapes in the context of changes in the coastline as well as in the climate? We challenge and are challenged by our young audiences who, for instance, ask us if the word colonial or colonial, historically used for general store or shop, are we really allowed to refer in this way because it evokes notions of European colonialism, exploitation, and imperialism? But lastly, we also initiate new ambitious research projects. We want to find out more about how we have used and explored the marine landscape and how it is coping. How is the situation of the sea depository in Norway, actually? How have we managed waste by dumping it into the sea? We need more knowledge. So, our ambition is no less than participating in making the UN goal for the ocean decade tangible, understandable, and functional, both for ourselves as a museum and for our audience. And we include our own heritage in museum, building on and expanding the accumulated knowledge in the collections. We work with partners, and we are implementing environmental humanities in the way that we think about and plan for future exhibitions and projects. So we are really looking forward to learning more from this conference and all the projects that's going on all over the world, and hopefully how museums can have the opportunity to be a driver for a shift towards a more sustainable future for the oceans. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tove, and thank you, Bert. And we now have 10 minutes in which I shall attempt to ask a question of my own, but also invite you. So start thinking now if you have something to ask Tove and or Bert. I have a question for the two of you, the same question. Start with you, Bert. So what has been or will be the biggest challenge of this redirection from shipping to Maritime Museum?
First of all, I tend to say money at the moment, because as most of you know, we have inflation and the prices are up, and we try to keep our tickets low for the visitors. And so money is one thing to tell the story in a good way. The other thing is that we have to change over time. So for example, we are building now our new children's exhibition, and it's no longer about transport and cranes and things like that. It's about the undersea world. So every time you look at a new exhibition, think about what is the story we are going to tell, and is it about shipping or is it about a healthy ocean and a healthy planet?
Thank you. Tove, your greatest challenge?
Thank you. Well, perhaps it is how thinking about and connecting our collections, our research, our history as a shipping museum, more or less, to the new audiences and the new questions, and at the same time keeping our core audiences, not excluding our heritage as research institution, but finding new ways of implementing the new histories into what we already got and how we expand them, the stories and the narratives. And I think for a small museum, we need partners. We need to hold on to the principle of new research. And if we can't fund it, we have to beg, borrow, or steal somehow. Networking is one great way of doing that, finding new partners, so that we don't dabble with this alone, but we work with partners around us.
Very good. You can keep the microphone. Do we have a question from the audience for Bert, Tove, both or some? Yes, Kevin Fuster.
Thank you for great papers. My question relates to Stavanger. ICMM met in Stavanger back in '97 or something around then. And at that stage, it was obvious that the big backer of the museum was the oil industry, and Stavanger being that, having that crucial location in terms of oil and the oil industry in Norway. Obviously, things are changing dramatically, and you showed that in a sense in your slides. How are you managing that new reality? How are you working with the oil industry, and do you get pressured, shall we say, by them to present their story rather than perhaps a more inclusive story, and one which is challenging rather than just accepting a sort of propaganda aim?
Locally, we don't actually, or not yet. I think we are really interesting partners. Maritime museums are interesting partners because we do have a context and a history, an authority to present stories to the audience that the audience rely on in a way. And we don't really seek financing for controversial topics directly from the oil industry. It's more indirectly. We are funded by so many sources, including, of course, the government and the city, and which derives a lot of its tax income from this industry. But it's not like it's a one-to-one relationship. And we never encountered problems in any way yet. It depends, of course, on how provocative we choose to be, I guess. If we want to confront them, it would be easy to do that. But the industry is also changing rapidly, becoming greener. So green shipping is one of the topics that is much debated now. And we would like to engage in conversation with the maritime industries and find out more about, but what is this green shipping? How green is it? and so on. So we are more in a conversation than depending on them, luckily for us.
A relevant question, yes?
Hi, thank you. Hi, Anna, Tove. This is a related question. When you had Greta Thunberg sitting on your doorstep, did you manage to collect anything from that event for your collections to reflect that moment?
Well, she wasn't sitting on our doorstep. She was sitting on the production plant doorstep, luckily for us. But we do interview and we do take photos of happenings like this, so that we have some kind of recollection of what is going on outside, because it is literally outside the doorstep that these conferences are taking place. So we are very aware of it, and we try to bring it into to the media presentations that we do, and so on. And we also invite discussions in our museum, trying to put current issues on the agenda.
Thank you. And we have one more audience question, I think. Is it a thing or okay? Okay.
Thank you, Tove. Thank you, Bert. Tove, just ripping off the Greta Thunberg, it was my question as well. Is there an opportunity, do you feel, for your museum to have more of a direct dialogue partnership with Extinction Rebellion in the context of what you're working to achieve and what Extinction Rebellion is working to achieve?
Perhaps the question should be if you want a more working partnership with them.
Well, we haven't went into direct conversation, and that's partly also because we do have a petroleum museum in Stavanger, which is often dealing much more directly with these issues, incorporating them directly into their exhibitions, while we are looking at it on a perhaps grander scale. But we did invite some of the local environmental politicians and organizations to present a discussion only a few weeks ago. So we are trying to keep current in that way.
Great. So in conclusion, I have a very brief question for both of you, and we'll start with you, Bert. A short advice for your colleagues here in the audience, what to do, what to think about when you're in a process like the one you're in?
I think you have to experiment a little bit. Like the question for Extinction Rebellion, I think we're all a bit afraid of organizations like this, but we need to start a dialogue with them one way or another. For example, I showed the slide with the river cleanup boat from the ocean cleanup, and this river cleanup is not going to solve the problem of the plastic in the ocean, but the dialogue and the attention it gets makes us going a step further. And I'm not figured it out how we can do that with Extinction Rebellion, but they're working on the planet, they're working on our future, and that's important. So some way or another, we have to try things with them, I think.
So a little bit more bold experimenting. What about you? Short advice for your fellow museum directors.
I think we should be proud of our museums and bold. I think we have something that's attractive for many partners, and that we should display ourselves as a venue where a lot of these conversations can take place. And it's not always also about them and us. I don't think my young colleagues are members of Extinction Rebellion, but they certainly are very conscious about these issues. So we are also represented in a way in this new movement. New colleagues, young researchers share these values more or less. So we will be affected by it. So I think be brave, be proud of what we got, and go out and discuss with people. We are a safe venue for many groups.
That's an excellent way of ending this session on new ways of changing maritime museums in a sustainable way. Thank you very much.